Cardinal Dash, and so excited to welcome Cybele Zhang to the show. We had a great run with King Jemison. Last year, he's on to bigger and better things. So now we have a chance to talk some more Stanford football, and we're going to get things going right away with the topic that seems to be on everyone's mind, Stanford's chances for the rest of this year. A 1-1 start to open this campaign. Had a great game, a not-so-great game. Cybele, where do you think they stand for the rest of this year?
I wouldn't have said this last week, but I think Stanford will end up second in the Pac-12 North. I think Oregon is still a better team than Stanford is based off of their first two games. They've just performed better overall and have more star power and oomph than the Stanford team does. That being said, Stanford seems to have all the pieces and has the potential to put them all together, like we saw at USC last week. Of course, USC isn't the elite high-level competition that Stanford might face later in the season versus a UCLA or an Oregon. But Stanford made a statement last weekend, and I think they're going to carry that momentum with them throughout the season. So for me, of course, the Oregon game is going to be one to watch, and that'll be what decides the Pac-12 North. Stanford, in my opinion, will lose by a touchdown, maybe two. I think it'll be a close game. Stanford will be in it the whole time. It's going to be at home, Stanford Stadium, which, although not the rowdiest place, I think Stanford will be comfortable and will bring everything they have to that game. The game that I think will determine Stanford's fate, however, is UCLA. That's where Stanford has either the ability to cement themselves as a powerhouse in the Pac-12 or start to slip.
That's interesting. I definitely see you there. I just wonder if last week was really a statement game, as it feels like, and certainly how USC took it. But was it more to do with Stanford doing well, or necessarily USC was really bad? Fired their head coach. We'll talk about it later in the show. But USC has all of the talent to run wild over the entire Pac-12 outside of maybe Oregon. Have not put it together. But clearly what we saw on Saturday was a team that just did not have the pieces, did not have the coaching, did not have the discipline. And we saw Stanford run wild. We saw Stanford dominate. Does that mean that Stanford is a great team that should be up there with the top in the conference? I don't know. I'm not ready to necessarily say that. However, as you're referencing, this Pac-12 North is weak this year. There's Oregon, and then there's a lot of, maybe they have a chance.
Wide open other than that.
It's wide open. So you have that game against UCLA, which I think will be big. It's the first weekend of school, and it's finally Stanford coming back home to Stanford Stadium, which is, as you say, not a loud place, not a raucous place, but it's something where they feel very comfortable. They're comfortable playing in the library. So they're coming back after a 7-game road trip. First time fans have been back since 2019 will be that UCLA game, but first they have to take on this Vanderbilt team in Nashville, and it's a really tough opening schedule. No other Power 5 team has 2 games on the road to start the season. Stanford has 3. The season that they set up for themselves is difficult. It's
and Power 5 games all season long.
There's
not a break in this schedule.
There's no break.
I think perhaps Vanderbilt's the closest thing to a break we'll get this season, which we don't want to get caught up in that either, because this could definitely be a trap for Stanford. But to circle back to last week, I think we're selling USC a little bit short. You know, they came into the game number 14. They were not a bad team. And I think a lot of people preseason would have had USC as number 1 or 2 in the Pac-12 overall. So I think last week's game was a big win, and we should celebrate that and learn from that and be happy about that, while also looking forward to the rest of the season. And we're ushering in a new era of Stanford football with Tanner McKee, and I think he is changing the dynamic of the program, the energy behind the program, and from the fan base, I think there's a new excitement around Stanford football that I personally haven't seen during my time at Stanford.
Yeah, I want to talk about Tanner McKee a little bit more, because I think this is a really exciting moment for Stanford football to have this highly, highly touted quarterback who just went off the face of the earth, went on a 2-year mission to Brazil, comes back, has to sit behind Davis Mills for a year, doesn't get to start week 1, splits time with Jack West, and now finally is getting his opportunity. And we saw a light show down in USC. So Cybele, as you're looking at the rest of the season, what do you expect from Tanner McKee?
I expect big things, and I think we need to look longer than just this season. I think we have a 4-year starter here. I mean, at least 3. And maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I think he has the pieces to be a future first-round pick, future Heisman winner, dare I say it. But I think last week he was very close to perfect. He was 1 of 1 on 4th down, which I don't know the last time I saw David Shaw go on 4th down. So that tells you he has a lot of faith in this quarterback. He had no interceptions, no sacks, threw for 200-something yards, rushed for a touchdown. He has all the pieces, and he has the weapons around him to support him. There was also a really great moment in last week's press conference, well, this week on Tuesday, where Shaw was talking a little bit about the previous quarterbacks that he's had in this system and how Tanner's personality fits into that. And I could tell from my own watching of Tanner in press conferences and games, he's a calm guy. In the post-game press conference, you think he'd be celebrating. He won his first game as starter in the closest to home he'll get. And he broke a smile one time, and it was breaking down that 4th down play for the touchdown. But other than that, super level-headed, calm, very relaxed. And Coach Shaw was talking about how he reminds him a lot of Davis last year, who is also kind of this notoriously calm person. Coach Shaw talked about Tanner being really positive, energetic, nothing rattles him. His response to everything is, okay, let's go. And I think that's what you want in your team leader, your quarterback, the person you have to turn to in stressful moments during the game and throughout the season. Coach Shaw also talked a little bit about KJ being the opposite extreme, full of passion, constantly, let's go, let's win. Andrew Luck, intensity but calm. And Kevin Hogan being extreme confidence. So I think personality-wise, we have a guy who is fitting in with Davis Mills, is fitting in with Andrew Luck. And those people have been very successful at Stanford, starting to be very successful beyond Stanford for Davis. So I think Tanner has a super high ceiling. We don't want to put too much pressure on him, but I think—
It seems like you just went there, Cybele. You're saying Andrew Luck, Davis Mills, that's what I'm expecting out of this quarterback.
We also had on the Fox stream of the game on Saturday, in the 4th quarter, Fox put up a comparison of Andrew Luck's first game and Tanner McKee's first game. And if you were watching, Tanner McKee did better than Andrew Luck did in his first start. So we'll see where the season takes us, where the next few years take us. But I think Tanner is very capable of very big things.
I think that's a good point, too. To be fair to Andrew, a little bit younger when he was making his first start, I think it does help for Tanner McKee to be our year age-wise and just the confidence and maturity, especially the maturity in his throws that he's making. It doesn't seem like a first-year starter.
Mm-hmm.
He's going out there, he's slinging it, he's finding Bryson Tremaine on the sideline. There's a lot of confidence, oozing confidence. And, yeah, I went back because you were talking about that moment in the press conference, watched it, and really interesting to see how Tanner McKee is stacking up to those other great Stanford quarterbacks. And I think that 4th down moment is the type of play that gets you really excited about Tanner McKee, but also gets you excited about David Shaw. Taking points off the board, you never see that. That's crazy. Stanford Twitter went wild after that moment because that's something we would just never expect. But that's something here. Starter making his first ever start in the Coliseum and going and having that type of play. That's really shows you what this team expects from Tanner.
Yeah, I think it's also important to think back to high school when Tanner was being recruited. He was the number 4 quarterback in his class, and that was a stacked roster ahead of him with Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, JT Daniels. And we'll see if Tanner can measure up, but I'm going to bet that he will.
Putting a lot on him very early, but I like the confidence and everything we've seen from him, football-wise, mentality. It adds up so far. He's making accurate throws. Definitely. He has the arm strength, command of the game. I think his command of the playbook is just growing as we're progressing through the season. So could be a lot from Tanner as we keep it going.
And I would say I think he should have started game one. I see why Shaw went with Jack West. He has more experience, more time in the Stanford system. I don't think he was able to deliver in these pressurized moments. We saw the 2 interceptions the first game. He's yet to make a career touchdown, which is pretty troubling, given that he started 3 games. So I don't see Jack West getting much of a future at Stanford.
Yeah, I mean, been a backup for a while, had his moments. He stepped into some really difficult positions. You think about that UCLA game where he was thrown into the fire.
Oregon after the COVID test.
Absolutely. So not ideal places to make starts, but we saw last week or 2 weeks ago now was probably the most ideal situation.
Mm-hmm.
You have all off season to prepare. Even though he didn't know he was going to be the starter, it was probably assumed. He was preparing as if he was the starter.
Right.
Had a game against Kansas State, which is not a powerhouse, and didn't perform up to expectations. So Jack West may not be the future, but it certainly looks like Tanner McKee is. And credit to David Shaw and his staff for identifying Tanner McKee, getting that commitment from him, which was never going to be a guarantee, and then following him for 2 years, allowing him to come into the system, playing him behind Davis last year. All of that builds up to this moment.
Yeah, and I'll also just add, Isaiah Sanders is also an option, and it's great to have him on those, run plays or the potential for him to run. So he's the 3rd quarterback to throw in the mix.
And then there's Ari Potter in the wings, and it looks like a lot of what happened last year with the Miller Moss or Ari Potter was the big thing in Stanford recruiting. Who are they going to take? And they went with Ari Potter, Miller Moss now with USC. And the idea was that Miller Moss is probably closer to game ready of the 2. But Ari Potter will have a lot of time to potentially develop under Tanner McKee, if that is the route that Stanford potentially goes to. And one thing that we have to note with that is people hardly ever transfer out of the Stanford program, especially as undergrads. So we expect Ari Potter to be here for 4 years. You think Tanner McKee might be a 4-year starter, 3-year starter. Ari Potter is there, learning the playbook, getting ready. One of the first 2 ever freshmen to come onto campus as an early enrollee. So a lot building up there. Stanford has a good program going for it. Recently, haven't seen necessarily the same level of success as we have become accustomed to.
And I think that segues well into our next point about recruiting. And it's great to see 2 California high school stars staying in California, going to Stanford. Of course, Stanford's recruiting message for as long as I can remember has been they have the combination of academics and athletics at an arguably unparalleled level. I think there's an argument for programs like Vanderbilt, Duke, Northwestern, perhaps throw Notre Dame in the mix. But Stanford knows who will be accepted academically, so that pairs down who they're going to go after recruiting-wise. But those people that they go after are able to deliver academically, able to deliver athletically, and I think there's varying degrees of success to that in the Stanford system. But we have someone like Tanner McKee who seems to be doing well and has made the academic requirements that he's need to make.
And we were having a chat about this the other day as we planned this show, and we were talking about Duke has men's basketball, Vanderbilt has baseball, 2 amazing programs. But you look at Stanford's athletic department, and it goes down the entire list of just extremely, extremely successful programs. You could look at the Directors' Cup if you need any verification of that. But
Ignore last year.
That didn't happen. Finished 2nd. But Stanford has a great pitch. It works for a lot of its sports. And I love what David Shaw describes about how when he goes to see a recruit, he'll visit their high school, and when he goes and he expects everyone at the high school to know who he's looking for, right? It's going to be that obviously a fantastic football player, but a fantastic person and a great student. So there's an idea, and Shaw promotes this heavily for his program, is the idea of a Stanford man. And that's what they're looking for. They have this idea. They know what they're looking for. They target it, and they recruit nationally. And I think it is fair to say, and as Shaw did say, they do it better than any other school. Northwestern, Vanderbilt, they haven't had the success. There's up years for sure. There's times when like James Franklin at Vanderbilt did well, but at the level that David Shaw has competing for Rose Bowls annually, Pac-12 championships, we haven't seen it recently. And I think COVID has to be thrown into the mix, especially if you look at this most recent recruiting class where they didn't have as much success as they're accustomed to. They didn't also get to show off the campus.
Mm-hmm.
So there's all of these factors. It's the academics, and then what we've been talking about, having this beautiful Stanford campus to show off helps a lot in that recruiting pitch.
It'll be interesting to see in the future, too, as Stanford continues to be test optional, I believe, how that might impact recruiting as well, because you don't have these tangible numerical benchmarks that people have to meet. So perhaps that'll open up the net that Stanford can cast, but we'll see.
And that's huge for the program and huge for colleges in general, of being able to look at someone holistically. I was reading Dave Keefer's Go Stanford article this week, had a great point about a 1991 roster. David Shaw on that roster, Jason Wingard, who was just named the president of Temple University over the summer, John Lynch, the GM of the Niners, and Cory Booker, U.S. Senator. So that's the type of person you're getting at Stanford. And what makes you excited as a recruit, where you're looking at, what am I going to get if I come to this university? It's all of that. So now it's Stanford. How do they put that together on the field to make it an attractive option? Are they getting guys to the NFL? Is it these flashy packages? We see them doing more and more with their recruiting, like having the early enrollees was a huge step for the program and something that recruits have been after for a long time. So slowly we see Stanford working towards a lot of bigger programs, working towards what an Oregon can do, what a USC can do, as opposed to having to fit into this mold of what a Northwestern can do or a Vanderbilt can do, where they're a little bit more limited, not able to go after recruits nationally.
Yeah, agreed. I think Stanford is always going to be limited by the infrastructure on campus. Like, we're not going to be Alabama, where there's 5 football fields and a football-only dorm and a football-only dining hall. But I think that's also part of what makes Stanford football special, is they have to interact with regular students and go to class with them and eat with them and live with them. So that's also part of the message, I think, as a recruit, that I'd be thinking about, is like, how am I interacting with the general public? And if someone wants that, then perhaps that might lift Stanford up over these programs where you're so insulated.
Stanford has a great recruiting pitch. I think it's abundantly clear as what they've done over the years with a limited pool of applicants that can potentially get in to the university. Want to move next into a breakdown of what these two teams are doing with the rosters that they do have. Stanford, Vanderbilt, 2 programs, 2 storied programs, SEC, Pac-12. Stanford's first SEC game since 1978. So pretty awesome note there. Stanford heading into Nashville this weekend. Cybele, what do you expect? Tail of the tape. Tell us what you've seen.
I think Stanford's defense is going to win out over Vanderbilt's offense. Their quarterback, Ken Seals, I believe his name is. I think that tells you something about him if I didn't remember his name. Has been largely forgettable this season, thrown 2 interceptions. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ball, Caillou Kelly has had an interception every single game. I think he's going to get his 3rd in a row this weekend, perhaps another pick 6. He's been there in pass coverage every single play I've seen. He held Drake London to inferior numbers than usual. And I think he'll measure up. I think the Stanford defensive line has been solid, not necessarily showy or doing anything extravagant, but they've done everything that they need to do. I think they'll pressure Seals, and Stanford will come away with the win.
Do you have any worry about the secondary with the 2 freshmen that listed on the depth chart there, Jimmy Wyrick, Jaden Slocum being the other one who was the early enrollee with Ari Pachu? Is that worrying to you at all, with Stanford once again facing some injuries?
Yeah, I think it's a little worrying. That's definitely the weaker side, and I will expect Vanderbilt to target that corner. But I think Stanford will measure up. I think we have Ricky Miezon back. We have Jacob Mangum-Farrar back. And overall, Stanford seems to be rolling on all cylinders, except for that one spot.
Absolutely. and Stanford held USC to basically 13 points. Obviously, that 4th quarter,
we had backups in the whole time. Stadium was empty. USC was treating it like the game was over, and I think Stanford was starting to as well.
So you look at that dominant performance on defense where they really put a lot together. You mentioned Caillou Kelly, absolutely incredible. Going into the Coliseum where his father played, and then really showing out as Stanford continues to develop great secondaries under Dwayne Aquino. just churning out. We had Paulson Adebo just leave the draft last year,
and crazy first game in the NFL.
Already showing out in the NFL. But Caillou just doing some excellent stuff in coverage, really shown out since his time as a freshman. He's been on the field. He won a job back then, and he's continued it. He's grown a lot. Looks like knows what he's doing clearly with how this season has started.
Yeah, we had this great moment after he had the pick six and he went back to the sideline and Shaw kind of embraced him. And post game, Caillou was saying he told him not to be too high, not to be too low. And I think Stanford just needs to keep that same mentality going into this week, not to fall into Vanderbilt's trap. And don't be too high, don't be too low. Just maintain their solid performance that they've had for the first 1.5 games.
Which could be really big going into SEC territory, coming off a huge win, a lot of positives coming out of it. But again, you're rocking with a first-year starting quarterback or first time starting for Tanner McKee. So it's a lot about how can I handle this mentally. We talked earlier that clearly Shaw thinks he's up for the task. He trusts him to do all of that. But it's a little bit difficult to trust the quarterback to go in. So it's about, what do you expect out of the running game specifically? We saw Nathaniel Pete has a fantastic breakaway run. Austin Jones has been consistently solid. Do you think that's a place that Stanford can make some noise this week?
Yeah, I think we saw the weaknesses of the O-line week 1, and Stanford made some adjustments. Week 2 against USC, really cleaned that up. And I think the O-line will beat out Vanderbilt's D-line. I think Stanford will need to establish the run game. This is one of the weaker D-lines that they're going to face this season. And if Stanford can't put up 200 yards on the ground, that might be a red flag for me. Just because Stanford has the potential. We have a stacked roster of running backs, and we just need those gaps to open up and for them to make those plays. And I think this is the game that we can see Austin Jones reemerge. We can see Nathaniel Pete keep that momentum. We can see E.J. Smith take over. But the fact that Stanford has so many good pieces that they can cycle in and out, Casey Filkins, Justice Woods, we've seen a little up in the spring game. If Stanford just does Stanford football and runs it up the middle, play after play after play, I think they'll win out. And that'll be important to win out in order to win the game.
This will be a great week for intellectual brutality. Of just coming in saying, you know what, we're going to go back. You know it's coming. We're going to run it down your throat anyways. We're going to have Austin Jones in there. We're going to have Nathaniel Pete. And this show has been a huge fan of Nathaniel Pete. King and I were begging for more touches for that kid all of last year. But we've seen some really special things out of these running backs, and especially those running backs being used in the passing game as well as just little safety options as Tanner McKee finds his footing. A lot of potential there.
Tanner has the feet to run himself. He's a large, relatively fast guy. I wouldn't be surprised if there were some quarterback sneaks there. Isaiah Sanders comes in. So add them to the list of potential running playmakers as well.
And Stanford could get really tricky with it. They could have some fun with this game. They could, every time you schedule a game, especially non-conference road game, it's a little bit about recruiting. It's a little bit about, can we make some noise? Can we have a program be known in here? So that's why Stanford loved that the All-State kickoff game was in Texas. They had a chance to show off for recruits there. Families get to visit. Stanford recruits go off from Texas. Now here's a chance to go to Tennessee and hopefully make some noise and make a better statement than they did in week 1.
Definitely.
And now this last question, we touched on it briefly a little bit earlier. This whole Clay Helton business. Stanford goes into the Coliseum, routes USC, really dominated that game, and then Clay Helton fired by AD Mike Bone. How much of that can you attribute to the Stanford game, or was it something else?
I think Clay Helton's time has been coming for a while. He has lost his ability to hire assistants. USC is slowly pulling the rug out from under him. And I think at any significant loss, he would have been gone. Stanford just happened to be the perpetrator of that loss. I don't think it was anything specific about Stanford or Stanford's performance, more about the fact that USC has been unable to replicate the Pete Carroll level of play for the last 10, 15 years. And USC fans want Pete Carroll level of play, and they're not getting that from Helton. So I think this was probably the right decision. I think we're seeing a lot of players come to USC and not develop, not reach their full potential. And with a new coach, they can open up that ability again. We don't know who that'll be, of course, but I think the interim coach is going to help them finish the season, and USC has the chance to turn that around. They can still go, be a one-loss team.
Dante Williams could absolutely take control of this program, and with the talent he has, make a lot of noise in the Pac-12.
Mm-hmm.
There's no doubt about that. I think what's really interesting is David Shaw's quote on Clay Helton. He operated the program with a lot of class and earned the respect of fellow coaches.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of what you hear from players, from fellow coaches after Clay Helton's firing was that he's a nice guy. And if that's the sentiment going around, great as a person, great as a neighbor, great as a teacher, as a football coach, you wonder, do you need to have a little bit of fear of your head coach? Do you really want to think of them as a nice guy? Is that really the best for your program? I think USC, after many, many years, found out that wasn't for them.
Mm-hmm.
But it also reflects on David Shaw, who you think everyone has utmost respect for David Shaw as a person, as a leader.
Mm-hmm.
But there is a sense that I'm not going to mess with him. Like you're in press conferences, you're watching your words. I want to make this right. I want to make sure that I'm not flubbing this question. He'll be nice to you about it, but he'll also tell you that was a bad question. I'm not answering that. Very straight up with you. And that's what it takes to be a college coach at this level. Mm-hmm. You need someone, and obviously we all have problems with David Shaw from time to time. You wonder about those punts. You wonder about a little bit of the conservative mindset on the football field. But you never questioned that he knew how to lead a football team. And I think that was a problem with Clay Helton.
Perhaps some of it, too, comes from Shaw was a player at Stanford. He knows Stanford. He knows what these players at Stanford are going through. He knows the institution in a way that perhaps Helton doesn't. And I think Helton's dealing with a lot more variables with the dynasty that USC football is. There's such a high standard that needs to be met, probably unreasonably high. I think to a certain extent, of course, people at Stanford want Stanford football to do well, but compared to USC, I don't think football is as integral to the institution's identity as it is, and there's not that same pressure.
I mean, a Stanford president, I think it was Hennessy, said basically, if we have a 6-6 team every year, I'm happy. They don't want scandals. It is a different. You're under a different microscope at Stanford. The spotlight is much different. Out here on the farm, you're not getting game day coming unless it's a one-off thing. Great game against Oregon. I'm hoping for it. I'm hoping for it this year. It'll be fantastic. But you're not under the same spotlight as you would be at another school. It just requires a lot different from the head coach, from a program, from recruits, the whole line. So,
and that's there's pros and cons to that. We see Stanford, the perennial runner-up for the Heisman. We see Stanford struggling to get votes in the AP polls. So
you see people not staying up to watch Stanford games. It's down the whole line.
So do you want the pressure and everything that comes with it, or do you want to be the permanent underdog sometimes ignored?
Parallel, Milwaukee Bucks, in the NBA, is a franchise a little bit under the radar, but built everything up from the ground up. That's what it would be like if Stanford would ever to win a national championship in our lifetime. It would have to be a long process, incredibly talented player, just getting a little bit lucky here and there.
Which, of course, is hard to do in a collegiate football program where you have someone for max. I mean, there are some 6 years, but 4 years, give or take.
You can't spend like the Nets can or the Lakers can, whereas some college programs operate like that. Alabama can do that. Clemson can do that. Stanford can't do that.
For sure.
That's all for this episode of Cardinal Dash. So happy to have everyone back on our show. Thank you so much, Cybele, for joining me. Follow us, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram.